I'd like to address some of the challenges that we've been thinking about in terms of reading skills and when learning Gemara. The challenge of how to actually teach effectively the skills to learn and read Gemara, and secondly, how to overcome the challenges of teaching the actual content when the skills could be an obstacle. So one question is how to teach the skills, and the second is how to overcome the obstacles that the lack of the skills could present in the Talmud classroom. And I think one other issue which is related to that is not exactly textual skills, but one of the challenges of Gemara is the maybe we could say the disorganization of the Gemara itself, but also the disorganization that often could occur in a Talmud classroom because of the fact that teachers do a good job at preparing a lot of resource materials, worksheets, extra sources that are needed to complement the Gemara, and the text itself is foreign to the students, and then you have to sort of manage all of the papers and all of the resources, whether they're online resources or physical resources, and really helping students keep Gemara organized so that they can actually follow the content of what's happening in the Gemara classroom. So the first thing that I'd like to suggest, just a few ways that I found helpful in addressing these challenges. The first is that the more prepared a teacher is, the better. The more prepared the materials are. And this is very hard to do when a teacher has a different Masechet every single year, but when we do teach, repeat the same content, the same Masechtot, it becomes more possible to prepare all of that material, to compile it, and to present it in as organized a fashion as possible. So instead of having, for myself, the first year of teaching was a lot of handouts. The second year, there were a lot of booklets. So the handouts became booklets or unit booklets, and then it became semester booklets or workbooks until it became a full workbook for at least a semester or for a year. So the more organized our material can be, I believe, the easier it is for students to follow, and then the class could actually be a very clear and organized classroom, as opposed to feeling very haphazard and disorganized. Not only could the student not follow the flow of the conversation of the Gemara, they also don't know where all their handouts are or all their resources are. There aren't really a lot of pre-made materials like you buy a math textbook. All the units are just laid out in order with the content and then the examples and then the homework and then the next unit, and each unit is designed to build on the previous unit. So that doesn't necessarily exist for Gemara, and I think that's part of the job of the teacher to really do the best to create that, especially if it's like a 11th or 12th grade honors class, students might be more able to keep that all together, but for most classes that's very challenging. So I'll just share with you, I've actually prepared a bunch of workbooks that I use for my classes. I actually prepared it with the other teachers that I worked with, and ultimately we published them, and they're actually on Amazon. The Talmud, the workbook for the Talmud student, and the biggest contribution to me is the fact that the workbook lays out all of the units one after the other, so that the teacher has an organized system of what we're teaching, one unit after the other, and it doesn't feel like, we're skipping around or we're jumping back and forth or we're going to a Rambam, we're going to Shulchan Aruch. It's all laid out extremely clearly and pre-designed based on what we found to be most effective as we teach in the classrooms. If we look inside the workbook, there's a few things that are used to help overcome these obstacles of the organization of the Gemara class, and also of the challenges with the skills. So the first is that there are an array of videos that we created to Well, we'll talk soon about how to use them, but resources that we created to help students review and study the material that we learned in class. So if the students use the online version, they can click on the links to find the videos. If they're using a printed page, they can use the QR codes. Um, so um, Maybe we'll come back to those videos and the dictionary in a bit. So, firstly, like any text that I feel is important for my students to see, and as a reference, I want to put it in the booklet so that they don't have to pull out other books. It's great for students to learn the skill of finding Shema in a siddur as a reference for the Gemara, which is quoting psukim from the Kriyat Shema, but it's also not always practical for students to be able to do that. So I laid out the Shema on page 1. This is the beginning of Maseches Brachos, and I included the pasuk about Zechir Tzitzias and Shrayim, which comes up in the Gemara, of course. The translation. Once the text is here, this is a very easy thing to do for homework. Just to create like a little bit more background, like read the Shema in Hebrew and English. Write down in the margins the themes, the topics that are being discussed in the Kriyat Shema. I mean, it can be done during class or as homework, but if you want to give a little homework that's not too taxing, that feels meaningful, I think it's sort of self-evident that this could be something which is useful. And of course, the Gemara will come back to it many times. The psukim of the Kriyat Shema. Here, I'm not trying to advocate for particular sources. I started the course with the Shoresh Mitzvah from the Sefer Chinuch. What you'll see is that in terms of the format of the workbook, my goal in the Sefer Chinuch here is to get the main idea. So there's no like vocabulary bank or like there's no exercise in writing every single word. Because I'm not going to study. They're not going to be responsible to know every single word of the Sefer Chinuch, other than the main ideas. Biographies, I think, are a very important thing. I don't necessarily read it in the class with students when they're spacing out. They might read it and understand who are the people that we're learning about. Here's a basic point in the Minchas Chinuch. And one more background is the Kriyat Shema of Rabbi Akiva. The idea that Shema might be familiar to students as something that's said before death, that's said before martyrdom. And I think the story of Rabbi Akiva, which is 60 daf ahead, but we might not get to it right away, but it's pretty foundational to be aware of the story. And the thing that I want to show you is that, first of all, it's divided by sentence. And the sentences are numbered. The numbering makes it very easy to call on a student and say, could you read box number 4, as opposed to, could you read the 14th line after it branches to the right. Makes it just easy to reference it. That's the purpose of the numbers. And the sentences, the way I would do this story also is not to focus on the textual skills of learning how to divide the Gemara into sentences, what each word means, because here again the goal is really to know the basic story, but I don't want to just present the story in translation. I want to read the text. The way I generally do this is I have a student read each sentence. Student number 1, read box number 1. What do you think it means? Let's translate it, and then the students have to write the translation of the full sentence so that they're tied to the text. They're getting some experience and familiarity with the text, but it's not overly textual. So here, this is an example of not necessarily teaching the textual skills, but going around the textual skills, getting to the point of the Gemara without being held back by the obstacle that the students can't translate everything or know when to stop after each sentence. This whole story is 2 pages. It generally can be done in 1 period or 2 periods of class with discussion. So here, the goal is the content knowledge. The text is there to help connect students to the text, but not to be fully focused on the language of the Gemara. Now here is what I call my standard page, which is, this is the Gemara that we're learning, the Daf Beis Amud Aleph of Maseches Brachos. And this is a tool that I learned and found to be appreciate very much, where basically Every single word of the Mishnah and Gemara is listed here in order and numbered. So it feels very tedious. It goes on and on and on because that's how it goes. But the idea is that if you want to ever learn the textual skills of learning the words of the Gemara, so you need to actually break it down word by word. Here, there's a difference in the experience level of students. If it's a very basic level, they'll really need to translate every single word, word by word. And students, I find, 9th, 10th grade do not find this too tedious. They actually find it very confidence building, that they actually know how to read the words of the Gemara. Now, because if you either do the text or don't do the text. If you want to do the text, this is what you need to do. In a class where they have a little bit more knowledge of vocabulary and they might find it tedious, I might say, it's a note-taking guide. Write down the translation of any word that you think you don't know. If there's a million words in a row that you do know, you don't need to write that down. These are your notes. So beginners write down every word. Level 2, write down just the words you don't know. Level 3, where they know most of the words, maybe this whole worksheet won't really be useful for them. But for many students, it is useful. Personally, I have a star next to all the words that I want the students to be responsible for. The words that I decided, in my own judgment, are important for them to memorize and know on vocabulary tests. So starring it at the outset rather than before a test enables students to take notes and to know which words are going to be the important ones. So they'll be conscientious about translating those and not as much with the other words. Here again is a video link to a video which is used for review of the Gemara. The third column, which is blank, is where the students could find the end of the phrase, like Me'emas Konesh Rabba Arvin, 1 through 6, and then there's a break. So they'll draw a line after line 6, and here's where they'll write the full phrase. What they're going to start to do is translate each word in the boxes and read down the column and realize it doesn't make any sense because of the syntax. So in this column is where they're going to write the full sentence in a way that makes sense. My goal is that after studying this, the student will be able to read from a traditional Gemara, which is a difficult step, not always able to be done, but that's the goal. That's the game plan. Depending on the level and the style of the students, they might be able to learn from the Gemara at the same time as taking notes here. I find that sometimes giving the students all these worksheets, which are extremely supportive, makes it hard for the students to be motivated to go to the traditional Gemara. And this is how it goes, like line after line, page after page. And here's a summary, which is a worksheet. And here's like I want to learn a Rabbeinu Yonah, so the Rabbeinu Yonah is in the worksheet, and then there's lines for students to take notes. Here again, my goal with Rabbeinu Yonah is not to learn this is just my choice in this sugya, not to learn necessarily the skill of knowing every word of Rabbeinu Yonah. I'm not going to test them on their ability to read it back, but just to know the main idea. In the Gemara, they will be tested on, students need to be tested on the thing that we taught. So if we taught how to read every word, they'll be tested on how to read every word, either with a vocabulary section on a test, a vocabulary quiz, or on a test. I personally will put quotes from the Gemara that they have to actually explain exactly what the quote means, because that's what we're learning here. And again, like biography, I think is very important. To go on to a couple of other resources that could be added to this. So what if a student misses a word, or we want to assign students the maybe charuta work to figure out what the words mean and try to figure out where to break it up and how to explain it. So what do you do when you don't know what a word means? So obviously there's a number of possibilities besides asking the teacher. Well, asking the teacher is okay. Sometimes I'll write the words on the board that I think are going to be most difficult, and that could be helpful. Of course, students might want to use online resources like Safaria and Merkava. I don't love it personally for this because they don't know which word necessarily means what. The old-fashioned way is a dictionary, which is, of course, a good method. The challenges with the dictionary is that the students might not find the exact word in the dictionary. They might not figure out what the shoresh is of the word they're looking up. They also might not know if it's an Aramaic word or a Hebrew word. They might look in the Jastro, but the word is being quoted from a pasuk, which is not in the Jastro. So what we did for Maseches Brachos is we did create a dictionary, a homemade dictionary, which could be printed or used online. And this dictionary has every single word that appears in our Talmud syllabus for Maseches Brachos in the exact format that is in the Gemara. So it has like avosi, avihem. We don't. These are separated because on daf, and we gave them the daf so they can reference it to make sure they have the right word. On daf gimel we have avihem. On daf samach we have avosai. So here, if a student has this dictionary, either printed or online, they could actually, a student with almost no background could quote unquote make a laning by going through all the words, writing down the words they know, looking at the words they don't know, then trying to figure out where the phrase ends, and then figure out what the phrase means, and then put the sentences together. Obviously, the students will need some guidance from the teacher, but really a lot of the work could be done by the students. Of course, this takes a long time, but that's how Gemara is. So a teacher has to decide when we're going to go, dive fully in and say we're going to learn how to read these words and word by word, etc. And then when maybe in order to spice up the class, we learn a source that we're not going to learn as carefully inside, but we're going to be focusing on content and themes. I think that a lot of times we try to choose what's our goal. Is it conceptual knowledge? Is it meaningful knowledge? Is it skills? I think any class that has only one is going to be really unsuccessful. So you want to spice it up and focus on skills here, and then focus on content or themes or meaning or conceptualization for other units. There's more to say about this, but we will, let's continue next time. I'd love to hear your reactions to these ideas.